My daughter found an intruder living inside our walls. Zoe began drawing the Rat King's castle 4 days after we moved into our Boston townhouse, announcing over Tuesday dinner that the secret ruler of the house hated it when we locked the basement door at night. My wife Emma chuckled and asked where the Rat King lived, playing along with what we assumed was just a coping mechanism for moving to a new city. Zoe described a maze of dark tunnels, dropping specific details about a hollow space behind the primary bedroom's closet and a fake ventilation grate near the water heater. I smiled and went back to eating my chicken parmesan, dismissing it as the overactive imagination of a second grader adjusting to an unfamiliar 1890s Victorian home. Kids her age process stress through elaborate storytelling, and Zoe had always been obsessed with fantasy books. The Rat King seemed like a harmless, spooky fairy tale. What struck me as odd was how accurately she mapped out the architectural layout of our HVAC system, but I chalked it up to her exploring the basement while we were unpacking boxes. The drawings became increasingly intricate and disturbing. Over the next 12 days, Zoe mapped out an entire secondary floor plan. She sketched out how the Rat King could see into the guest bathroom through a tiny pinhole near the crown molding. She drew a detailed diagram showing how someone could bypass the ADT security sensors on the back patio by sliding a thin piece of plastic under the magnetic seal. She even started noting a schedule, writing down that the Rat King goes to work at 2:15 a.m. every Thursday, taking a heavy black bag with him. Each new sketch was handed to us casually while we watched television or folded laundry, with Zoe treating these chilling schematics as completely ordinary school assignments. Emma and I started getting genuinely freaked out. We wondered if the previous owners had left behind creepy architectural drafts that Zoe had found in the attic, but there were no loose papers anywhere in the house. Zoe remained perfectly happy, showing zero signs of trauma, except when she adamantly refused to walk past the hallway linen closet after 8 p.m. I started keeping the drawings in a manila folder on my desk, intending to show them to the property inspector who originally cleared the house. The pile grew massive as the horrifying pattern became undeniable. Zoe wasn't inventing a fantasy world. She was transcribing real mechanical anomalies in our home. She drew a red X over the Wi-Fi router, claiming the Rat King stole our internet at exactly 3 a.m. She noted the smell of ozone and burnt coffee near the chimney base. She sketched a precise diagram of the crawl space beneath the floorboards, showing a spliced electrical wire tapping directly into our main breaker panel. When I took a flashlight and actually inspected the guest bathroom wall at 11:45 p.m., I found the pinhole exactly where she drew it. It wasn't a nail hole, it was a perfectly drilled viewing port. Emma wanted to pack up Zoe and drive to a hotel immediately, but my protective instincts morphed into a blinding, obsessive anger. I didn't call the police right away because I knew they would just do a cursory walkthrough, find nothing, and leave us sitting ducks for whoever was violating our sanctuary. Instead, I took Zoe's most detailed drawing, the one labeling a false panel behind the hallway linen closet, and grabbed my heavy steel crowbar from the garage. At 2 a.m. on a Thursday, the exact time Zoe noted the Rat King's movements, I stood in the dark hallway while Emma waited in the locked car with our daughter, the engine already running. I jammed the crowbar behind the cedar backing of the closet and ripped it forward with all my body weight. The wood splintered with a deafening crack, revealing a hidden, soundproofed cavity between the floors. It wasn't a random drifter. It was Ethan, the incredibly charismatic real estate agent who had sold us the property for $1.2 million just weeks prior. He had a sleeping bag, a laptop connected to our clone network, and a massive duffel bag filled with our stolen mail, bank statements, and Emma's heirloom jewelry. He had set up a sophisticated, long-term identity theft operation right inside the bones of our dream house. And that's when he dropped his laptop, pulled a massive hunting knife from his belt, and lunged straight at my throat. I didn't think. I just swung the crowbar. It wasn't like the movies where there's a choreographed struggle. It was just a sickening thud of steel hitting bone. The crowbar caught him across the shoulder, sending the knife clattering onto the hardwood. Ethan slumped against the back of the hidden compartment, his face twisted in a mixture of agony and a weird, chilling realization that he'd been caught. He didn't scream. He just panted, his eyes darting toward the hole I'd just ripped in the wall. "Don't," I hissed, the adrenaline making my voice sound like someone else's. I had the crowbar raised again, ready to bury it in his skull if he moved an inch. He didn't move. He looked at the duffel bag, then at me. "Mark," he said, his voice shockingly calm for a man who had just been hit with 3 pounds of forged steel. "You don't want to do this. Just let me walk. You get the jewelry back. You get your life back. No police, no questions." I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated hatred. This man had sat in our kitchen 2 months ago, drinking expensive espresso we'd bought to celebrate the closing, telling us what a vibrant neighborhood this was for a young family. He'd helped Zoe find the best bedroom for a little princess, all while he knew he had a key to the crawl space, all while he was planning to live 3 feet away from where she slept. "Shut up," I said. I reached into my pocket with my left hand and dialed 911, keeping the crowbar leveled at his chest. The police arrived 7 minutes later. Those 7 minutes felt like 3 hours. Ethan didn't say another word. He just sat there in the dark of his little rat hole, nursing his shattered shoulder and staring at me with a look that wasn't fear, it was calculation. He looked like a man who was already figuring out his next move before the first one had even failed. The responding officers were stunned. They'd seen squatters before, but never a high-end real estate agent running a data mining operation out of a hidden architectural void. They handcuffed him, hauled him out through the front door, and spent the rest of the night processing the scene. By 5 a.m., the house was crawling with forensics. They found more than just jewelry and mail. Ethan had installed high-gain antennas inside the attic rafters to intercept the neighborhood's Wi-Fi signals. He wasn't just targeting us. He was using our house as a hub to scrape data from every home on the block. The Rat King wasn't just a nickname Zoe had made up. It was the name of the folder on his laptop. Emma and Zoe came back inside once the police cleared the area. Zoe looked at the hole in the closet, then at me. She didn't look scared. She looked relieved. "The Rat King is gone, Daddy?" "He's gone, honey. I said, pulling her into a hug. I felt her small heart beating against mine, and for a second, I thought it was over. But then, the lead detective, a guy named Miller with a face like a crumpled paper bag, called me over to the dining room table. He had a evidence bag in his hand. Inside was a small, leather-bound ledger they'd found tucked into the lining of the sleeping bag. "Mr. Thorne," Miller said, looking at me with a strange expression, "we're going to need to talk about your closing documents and your mortgage." I looked at the ledger. It wasn't just a list of stolen passwords. It was a ledger of payments, hundreds of them, dates, amounts, and initials. "The house was a short sale," I said, my heart starting to sink. "We got a deal because the previous owners went into foreclosure. Ethan handled everything. He said the bank wanted a quick exit." Miller flipped the ledger to the last page. There was a copy of our deed, but the signature on the buyer line wasn't mine. It was a perfect forgery of my handwriting, but the bank listed as the lien holder wasn't the one we'd signed with. "Ethan didn't just sell you this house, Mark," Miller said quietly. "According to these records, he owns the shell company that supposedly bought the debt from the original owners. And the mortgage you've been paying for the last 2 months, it's been going into a private offshore account he controls." I stood there, looking at the house I'd just spent my entire life savings on, the crown molding, the restored hardwood, the dream we'd moved across the country for. "Wait," I said, the room starting to spin. "If the bank doesn't have our mortgage, and the deed is a forgery, then technically," Miller finished, "you don't own this house, and neither does Ethan. The original foreclosure was never filed properly because the paperwork was intercepted. This property is currently in a legal limbo that could take years to untangle." I looked over at Emma. She was sitting on the stairs, her head in her hands. Zoe was back in the living room, picking up her crayons. "Daddy?" Zoe called out. "Yeah, Zoe? The Rat King said something before you hit him," she said, her voice small. I walked over to her. "What did he say, honey?" "He said the king doesn't live in the castle. He just keeps the keys for the real owners." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I looked back at Detective Miller, who was now holding a second evidence bag. Inside was a set of 6 keys, each labeled with a different address in our neighborhood. All of them were houses Ethan had sold in the last 6 months. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Ethan wasn't just a squatter. He was a caretaker, and we were just the latest set of tenants in a neighborhood he was slowly turning into a giant, silent honeycomb of fraud. The next morning, the for sale sign was back up on the lawn of the house across the street. I stood on my porch, watching a new couple, young, excited, probably carrying a pre-approval letter, walk up the steps with a different agent from the same firm. I looked at my phone. I had a voicemail from our bank, or what I thought was our bank. When I played it, it wasn't a bank representative. It was a recorded message, a neutral, automated voice. "Mr. Thorne, regarding the occupancy of 412 Maple Street, your initial trial period has concluded. Please vacate the premises by Monday at noon, or the secondary protocols will be initiated." I looked at the hole in my linen closet. I looked at the pinhole in the bathroom wall. I realized then that Ethan wasn't the top of the food chain. He was just the one who got caught. I didn't tell Emma about the voicemail. I just went to the basement and started packing the boxes we'd only just emptied. I worked in silence, the sound of the tape dispenser echoing through the empty-feeling house. Around 3 p.m., a black sedan pulled up across the street. It didn't belong to the new couple. It just sat there, idling. I watched from the window, keeping the lights off. A man got out, walked to the curb, and looked directly at our house. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a high-visibility vest and carrying a clipboard, looking for all the world like a utility worker. He stayed there for 10 minutes, writing things down, looking at the roof, looking at the windows. Then he got back in the car and drove away. I went to the manila folder on my desk and pulled out Zoe's drawings. I started flipping through them again, looking for something I might have missed. On the very last page, underneath the diagram of the crawlspace, was a small drawing I hadn't noticed before. It showed our house, but there were lines coming out of it, connecting it to the house next door, and the house across the street, and the house behind us. In the center of the web, Zoe had drawn a large, black circle. Inside the circle, she'd written one word in her messy, second-grade scrawl: larder. I checked the Wi-Fi. It was down. I checked the landline. No dial tone. I went to the front door and tried to turn the deadbolt. It wouldn't budge. Not because it was locked, but because the cylinder felt like it had been jammed from the outside. I went back to the kitchen and grabbed the crowbar. I didn't feel like a homeowner anymore. I felt like a rat in a trap. And the worst part was, I could hear a faint, rhythmic scratching coming from inside the kitchen cabinets. It wasn't a person. It was the sound of someone or something turning a screwdriver into the wood from the other side. I walked over to the cabinet under the sink and ripped the door open. There was nothing there but our cleaning supplies. But when I pulled back the plastic tray of sponges, I saw it. A brand new, shiny silver bolt had been threaded through the back of the cabinet into the wall studs. They weren't trying to get in. They were locking us in. I ran to the living room window, but when I tried to slide it up, it only moved an inch before hitting a solid resistance. I looked at the tracks. Someone had drilled pins into the frames while we were sleeping or while the police were busy in the hallway. "Emma!" I yelled. "Get Zoe! We're leaving! Now!" "Mark, what's wrong?" she asked, coming out of the kitchen with a confused look. "The doors are jammed. The windows are pinned. We need to get out through the basement hatch." We ran to the basement stairs. I hit the light switch, but nothing happened. I clicked my flashlight on, the beam cutting through the damp air. We scrambled down the wooden steps, Zoe whimpering as I hauled her over my shoulder. When we reached the back corner where the old coal chute had been converted into a modern egress hatch, I shoved against the metal door. It didn't move. I threw my entire weight against it. Nothing. I looked through the small reinforced glass pane at the top of the hatch. Stacked neatly outside, blocking the exit completely, were the heavy concrete planters that had been sitting on our back patio. Someone had moved 300 pounds of stone in total silence while we were upstairs. I turned around, the flashlight beam dancing over the furnace and the water heater. That's when I saw the Rat King's secret entrance, the fake ventilation grate Zoe had drawn. It was hanging open, and from the darkness behind it, I heard a phone ring. Not my phone, not Emma's, a phone sitting right inside the wall. I walked toward it, my hand trembling on the crowbar. I reached into the dark space and pulled out a small, cheap burner phone. The screen was glowing. Unknown caller. I answered it. I didn't say anything. "Mr. Thorne, a voice said. It wasn't Ethan. It was a woman's voice, smooth, professional, and terrifyingly polite. You were told to vacate by Monday. It seems you're trying to breach the terms of your exit early. This is a violation of the holdover clause. Who is this? I breathed. Where are the police? The police processed a simple burglary, Mark. They have their man. The paperwork they took? It's already been corrected. You're currently trespassing on a private commercial asset. We'd prefer to handle this without a formal eviction, but you're making it difficult. I paid for this house! I screamed. You paid a contractor for a service, the voice replied. The service has concluded. Now, please, go back upstairs. Sit in the living room. We'll be sending a representative to help you sign the surrender documents. And if I don't, then we'll have to charge you for the damages to the closet and the shoulder of our associate. It would be a shame for this to go to collections, Mark. You have such a good credit score. We'd hate to ruin it. The line went dead. I looked at Emma. Her face was pale in the flashlight beam. Zoe was clutching her leg, staring at the open grate. Daddy, Zoe whispered. The Rat King isn't the boss. I know, baby, I said. The Rat King is just the one who feeds the cats. I looked back at the grate. Farther back in the darkness, beyond where the phone had been, I saw the glint of something. I moved the light. It was a bowl, a small ceramic bowl filled with fresh milk, and next to it, a plate with 3 perfectly sliced pieces of chicken parmesan, the same dinner we'd eaten the night we moved in. The food was still steaming. I stared at it, my brain refusing to process the impossible physics of the situation. The police had scoured this house. Forensics had been here until dawn. We hadn't left the property. And yet someone had bypassed the jammed doors, bypassed the pinned windows, slipped into the interstitial spaces of my home, and left a hot meal. Upstairs, I said. My voice was a dry rasp. Now, I grabbed Emma by the sleeve, hauling her backward. I didn't take my eyes off the dark square of the open grate until I was at the bottom of the wooden stairs. I kept the crowbar raised, expecting a face to appear in the opening, expecting someone to crawl out of the ductwork. Nothing moved. There was only the faint, sickening smell of marinara sauce and melted cheese mingling with the damp basement air. We scrambled up the stairs. I slammed the basement door shut behind us and threw the deadbolt. It was a flimsy lock, meant to keep a toddler from falling down the steps, not to keep out whatever was living in the walls. The kitchen was suffocatingly quiet. The afternoon sun was trying to push through the heavy curtains we'd hung just last week, casting long, dusty beams across the hardwood floor. Emma leaned against the granite island, her chest heaving. She looked at me, her eyes wide, the shock finally giving way to a frantic, clawing panic. Mark, what the hell was that phone call? Who was that woman? Why are we locked in? I set Zoe down on a bar stool. She didn't cry. She just pulled her knees to her chest and watched us with that same eerie, detached calm she'd had since this morning. The deed is fake, I blurted out. There was no time to soften it. The bank, the mortgage, all of it. Ethan didn't just break in. He sold us a house he didn't own, using a shell company, and whoever actually runs that company, they want us out. Emma blinked. But we paid $1 million. We wired the down payment, the title company. Fake, I said, pacing the length of the kitchen. I checked the back door again. The deadbolt was still fused solid. Or compromised. I don't know, Em. The detective said the original foreclosure was intercepted. We're in a legal black hole, and these people, whoever they are, they don't want to wait for the courts. They're trying to force an eviction right now. By locking us inside? Emma's voice cracked. That's kidnapping. That's false imprisonment. Call the police again. Call 911. I can't, I said. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and threw it onto the counter. No signal. They're jamming the cell service again, and the landline is dead. The burner phone. Emma pointed to my pocket. The one you took from the wall. I pulled it out. The screen was still on, displaying a generic wallpaper. I dialed 911 and hit send. The screen flashed times. Call. Failed. I tried again. Same result. The phone was hard-coded. It could only receive calls from whatever network they were using, or maybe it was on a closed loop. A heavy, measured knock echoed through the house. It came from the front door. 3 sharp raps. Emma flinched. I gripped the crowbar tighter. The metal was slick with sweat from my palms. I walked slowly out of the kitchen, down the hallway, past the gaping, splintered hole in the wall where the linen closet used to be. I stopped at the front door and looked through the peephole. A man was standing on my porch. He wasn't wearing a ski mask or carrying a weapon. He was wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a burgundy tie. He looked to be in his late 50s, with silver hair neatly parted to one side. He was holding a slim, black leather portfolio. He looked like a wealth manager stopping by for a quarterly review. Behind him, parked at the curb, was the black sedan I'd seen earlier. The engine was running. He knocked again. 3 sharp raps. Mr. Thorne, he called out. His voice was muffled through the heavy oak door, but it was clear, projected with the practiced authority of a man used to being listened to. I know you're standing there. Please, let's not make this undignified. Get off my property, I shouted through the wood. I want you off my property right now, or I'm breaking a window and screaming until the whole neighborhood calls the cops. The man sighed. I watched through the peephole as he opened his leather portfolio. You can try that, Mark, he said calmly, but the windows on the ground floor are triple-paned, shatter-resistant acoustic glass. Ethan made sure to install them before you moved in. For your comfort, of course. And as for the neighbors, they aren't going to help you. He pulled a sheet of paper from the portfolio and held it up to the peephole. It was a photograph, a high-resolution color photograph of Emma and Zoe at the park 3 blocks away. It had been taken from a distance, but their faces were perfectly clear. Zoe was on the swings. Emma was pushing her. The timestamp in the corner read times, yesterday, 4:15 p.m. We are a property management firm, the man said, lowering the photo. We manage assets. Sometimes those assets are distressed. Sometimes the occupants are uncooperative, but we always find a resolution. You're out of your mind, I spat, my heart hammering against my ribs. The police know about Ethan. They have his ledger. They have the deed. The police have a petty squatter who committed wire fraud, the man corrected smoothly. A rogue agent, a bad apple. The ledger, they have details his personal side projects. The jewelry, the mail theft. A shame, really. He got greedy. But the parent company, the entity holding the paper on this house, we are completely insulated. You are currently squatting in a property owned by Apex Holdings LLC. We have a court order for immediate vacancy due to hazardous conditions. He slid a thick document into the mail slot. It hit the floor mat with a heavy slap. "That is a voluntary surrender agreement," the man said. "It states that you acknowledge the fraudulent nature of your purchase, that you forfeit any claim to the title, and that you will vacate the premises immediately, leaving all fixtures and appliances intact." I stared at the stack of paper on the floor. "And my money? My down payment? Gone, I'm afraid," he said, sounding genuinely sympathetic, swallowed by the shell company Ethan set up. "You can sue him, of course, if he ever gets out of federal prison, but that's between you and him." "I'm not signing anything," I said. "Mark, look at the last page." I didn't want to bend down. I didn't want to take my eyes off the door, but I crouched, keeping the crowbar ready, and picked up the packet. I flipped to the back. It wasn't a legal clause. It was a printed bank statement. My bank statement. From the joint account Emma and I shared, the one holding our emergency fund and Zoe's college savings. The balance was zero. A wire transfer for $84,000 had been initiated at 9 a.m. that morning, routed to an offshore account. "Ethan cloned your network, Mark," the man outside said softly. "He had your passwords. He had your biometric data from the keystroke logs. The police took his laptop, yes, but they didn't take the servers in the attic, the ones wired directly into your main line. We triggered the transfer remotely." My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. I felt physically sick. The house, the savings, all of it, erased. "Sign the document," the man said. "Slide it back through the slot. The pins in your doors and windows will disengage. You can walk out the front door, get in your car, and drive away. You lose the house, yes, but you keep your lives. You keep your wife. You keep your daughter." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. "If you don't sign it by 4 p.m., he continued, his tone shifting into something cold and absolute, "we initiate the secondary protocols. You've already met one of our caretakers, the one who brought the food. There are 3 more currently stationed in the adjoining properties. They don't use the doors, Mark. They use the infrastructure, the walls, the vents, the crawl spaces. You are in a fishbowl, and they are the water." He snapped his portfolio shut. "You have 40 minutes. He turned and walked down the steps. I watched through the peephole as he got into the passenger side of the black sedan. The car didn't pull away. It just sat there, waiting. I backed away from the door, the surrender document heavy in my left hand, the crowbar useless in my right. Emma was standing at the end of the hallway. She had heard enough. She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. She didn't ask questions. She just looked at the papers in my hand, and then she looked at the hole in the wall. "Mark," she whispered, "we have to sign it. We have no money. We have no house. If they get inside. If I sign this, we have nothing," I said, my voice hollow. "We're homeless. We're broke. We won't even be able to afford a motel tonight." "We'll call my parents," Emma said, stepping forward and grabbing my arm. "We'll drive to Ohio. I don't care about the money. Look at what they did to the bank account in 2 hours. Look at what they did to the doors. They own this house, Mark. They own the walls. We can't fight ghosts." I looked down at the surrender agreement. There was a pen clipped to the top of the packet, a heavy, silver Mont Blanc. They had thought of everything. I walked into the living room and dropped the packet onto the coffee table. I felt entirely defeated. A lifetime of doing the right thing, of saving, of building credit, of following the rules, dismantled by a man with a sleeping bag and a drilled pinhole. "Okay," I said quietly. "Okay, I'll sign it. Pack a bag, just clothes, whatever you can carry. We're leaving." Emma nodded frantically and ran up the stairs. I sat on the edge of the sofa, staring at the dotted line. I uncapped the pen. My hand was shaking. I pressed the nib against the paper. "Daddy?" I looked up. Zoe was standing in the doorway of the living room. She was holding her pink Disney princess backpack. It looked heavy, bulging. "Are you packed, sweetie?" I asked, trying to force a reassuring smile. "We're going to go on a trip, to see Grandma and Grandpa." "The Rat King is a liar," Zoe said plainly. I stopped. "What do you mean?" "He said he was the only one who lived in the castle, but he wasn't. He told me he was the king of all the rats, but he was just a worker rat." She walked over to the coffee table. She unzipped her pink backpack. "When you hit him," Zoe said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "he dropped his bag, the black bag he takes to work at 2:15. I saw it on the floor when the police took him away." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a thick, black, leather-bound binder. It was as thick as a phone book. It looked incredibly old, the edges frayed, the cover scratched. "The police didn't see it," Zoe said. "They only took his computer and the little book in the sleeping bag, but this one fell under the coats in the closet. I took it, because it belongs to the castle." She dropped the heavy binder onto the surrender document. I stared at it. I slowly put the pen down. I reached out and opened the cover. The pages weren't printed. They were handwritten. Columns and columns of ink. Dates. Going back over 20 years. It wasn't a ledger for identity theft. It was a master schematic. The first page had a heading, written in sharp, architectural block letters. K. Knox, Hill Development, Subsurface Easements. I turned the page. It was a map of our neighborhood, but not the streets. It was a map of the underground. Tunnels. Old coal chutes, connected by excavated dirt pathways. Shared basement walls that had been hollowed out. I turned another page. A list of addresses. 50 homes in the Knox Hill area. Next to each address was a status code. Occupied, vacant, holding, prepped, harvested. Our address was listed. Next to it was the word harvested. "Mark?" Emma was coming down the stairs carrying 2 duffel bags. She stopped when she saw me flipping frantically through the binder. "What is that?" she asked. "It's the map," I said, my voice trembling. "It's the whole network. This isn't just a shell company stealing houses. They've built an entire parallel infrastructure under this neighborhood. They're moving between the houses underground. That's how they brought the food. That's how they bypassed the locks." I flipped to the back of the binder. Tucked into the inner sleeve was a thick manila envelope. I pulled it out and opened the clasp. Dozens of Polaroids spilled out onto the table. They weren't pictures of houses. They were pictures of people, families, sleeping in their beds, eating at their kitchen tables, watching TV, all taken from inside the walls. And then I saw the last photo. It was a picture of the man in the charcoal suit, the one sitting in the car outside right now, but he wasn't wearing a suit in the photo. He was wearing a high-visibility utility vest. He was standing in a massive, concrete-lined subterranean room, surrounded by servers and filing cabinets. He was smiling at the camera. On the back of the photo, someone had written a name and a number. Arthur Vance, Regional Director. I looked at the surrender document. Then I looked at the binder. "Mark," Emma said, her voice tight with panic. Sign the paper, please. We have 20 minutes. Let's just go. If we give them this house, I said, staring at the map, they bury this. They keep doing it. They've been doing it for 20 years. Arthur Vance isn't a property manager. He's the architect. I grabbed the binder and shoved it into my own backpack. We aren't signing, I said. Before Emma could argue, the burner phone in my pocket vibrated. I pulled it out. Unknown caller. I answered it. Mr. Thorne, the smooth, professional woman's voice said. She didn't sound polite anymore. She sounded tense. We have an anomaly on our inventory checklist. One of the primary logbooks from the 412 Maple Street node is missing. I looked out the window. The man in the charcoal suit, Arthur Vance, was out of the car. He was standing on the sidewalk, looking at our house, a cell phone pressed to his ear. I have it, I said to the woman on the phone. There was a long silence on the line. That logbook is proprietary property, she said softly. It contains trade secrets. If you walk out of that house with it, the surrender agreement is voided. You will not be allowed to leave the neighborhood. I know about the tunnels, I said. I know about Knox Hill development. I have the pictures. Another silence. Longer this time. When she spoke again, the corporate veneer was entirely gone. Locking the doors was a courtesy mark. It was to keep you inside until you signed. Now the protocol has changed. The doors are about to unlock, but I highly advise you not to run. Why? I demanded. Because the caretakers aren't just in the walls anymore, she said. They're coming up through the floor. A loud, splintering crash echoed from the kitchen. It sounded like a sledgehammer hitting hardwood. I didn't wait for the second strike. I grabbed Emma by the strap of her duffel bag and physically shoved her toward the staircase. Go! I yelled. Upstairs! Now! Another crash. This one was louder, accompanied by the high-pitched shriek of nails being violently ripped from the floor joists. The sound was coming from right under the kitchen island. I risked a glance backward as I pushed Zoe up the first few steps. Through the archway, I could see the wide planks of the original 1890s hardwood bowing upward. Then the wood snapped. A jagged hole opened in the middle of the kitchen floor, exposing the dark, dirt-floored crawl space beneath that part of the house. A heavy iron sledgehammer head breached the gap, pulled back into the darkness, and swung up again, tearing away a 3-foot section of flooring. A hand reached up out of the hole. It was wearing a thick black leather work glove. It gripped the edge of the jagged wood, followed by the top of a hard hat. Mark! Emma screamed from the top of the landing. I bolted up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, keeping the crowbar gripped so tight my knuckles felt like they were going to split open. When I reached the top, I slammed the heavy oak door of the primary bedroom shut and twisted the brass lock. It wasn't enough. Not against sledgehammers. Help me with the dresser, I barked at Emma. We threw ourselves against the massive, solid wood dresser we'd bought at an estate sale. It weighed easily 300 pounds. The movers had complained about it for 20 minutes. Driven by pure adrenaline, Emma and I dug our heels into the carpet and shoved. The wood groaned in protest, sliding across the floor and slamming against the bedroom door with a heavy, satisfying thud. I leaned against it, panting, my lungs burning. Downstairs, things had gone eerily quiet. The smashing had stopped. Now, there was just the sound of heavy boots walking across the kitchen floor. Slow, methodical. The sound of glass breaking as someone casually knocked a plate or a vase off the counter. What do we do? Emma whispered, her eyes darting around the room. The primary bedroom was a trap. The windows were pinned here too. I knew it without even checking, but I checked anyway. I went to the large bay window overlooking the street and pulled up on the sash, solid as a brick wall. I looked down. The black sedan was still idling at the curb. Arthur Vance was leaning against the hood, looking up at our window. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He was managing this like a demolition project. They're coming up, I said, listening to the heavy footsteps moving from the kitchen into the hallway. They're going to come up the stairs, and when they hit this door, that dresser is only going to buy us a couple of minutes. Call the police, Emma begged, digging her phone out of her pocket. Maybe the jamming stopped. Maybe it hasn't, I said. They own the network. They own the airspace around this house. We have to find another way out. There is no other way out, she sobbed, backing away from the door as the first heavy footstep landed on the bottom stair. Creak. I looked at Zoe. She was sitting on the edge of the California king bed, her pink backpack in her lap. She wasn't crying. She was just watching me. Zoe, I said, walking over and kneeling in front of her. The Rat King. When you drew the castle, you drew all the tunnels, all the secret places. She nodded slowly. Did you draw a way up? A way to the roof? The Rat King doesn't go to the roof, she said quietly. It's too hot. The humming boxes are up there. He doesn't like the noise. The servers. The ones the woman on the phone had mentioned. Ethan had installed high-gain antennas and servers in the attic. I grabbed the black binder out of my backpack and threw it open on the bed. I flipped past the neighborhood maps, past the lists of harvested houses, until I found the schematics for 412 Maple Street. Our house. The architectural drawing was incredibly detailed, far beyond what any city planning office would have. It showed the walls, the crawl spaces, the pinholes, and there, running right up the center of the house, alongside the brick chimney, was a thick vertical line labeled Times Chase A. It was a utility shaft, a hollow void, built to run plumbing and HVAC from the basement all the way to the roofline. The linen closet, I realized, tracing the line with my finger. The hole I busted open to get Ethan. That's the access point. Mark, we can't go back out there, Emma said, pointing a trembling finger at the bedroom door. The footsteps had reached the top of the stairs. They stopped right outside our door. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then, a voice spoke. It wasn't muffled. It sounded like it was inside the room with us. Mr. Thorne, Emma shrieked and slapped her hands over her mouth. I spun around. The voice was coming from the air conditioning vent set high in the wall near the ceiling. You've barricaded the door. The deep, resonant voice echoed through the ductwork. That's a predictable stress response. But I want to remind you of the structural layout of this home. Your primary closet shares a wall with the main vertical chase. We don't need to come through the bedroom door. I looked at the massive walk-in closet on the other side of the room, the one where Emma's clothes were hung, the one that sat right against the central chimney. As if on cue, a dull, rhythmic thudding started coming from times inside, times the closet. Someone was already in the shaft. They had climbed up from the basement, bypassing the stairs entirely. They were hitting the drywall from the inside. Thump, thump, thump. They're boxing us in, I said, grabbing the crowbar. We have to go up, to the attic. The attic access is in the hallway, Emma cried, her voice cracking. Right where the guy on the stairs is standing. I looked back at the schematic. My eyes raced over the ink lines, desperate for an anomaly, a mistake, anything. There, in the primary bathroom, just off the bedroom, there was a small square drawn on the ceiling. It was labeled Times, Maintenance, Hatch, Secondary. The bathroom, I hissed, grabbing the binder and shoving it back into my bag. There's a hatch in the bathroom ceiling. Ethan put it in so he could run cables to the roof without going into the hallway. Crack. The drywall in the closet splintered. A cloud of white gypsum dust puffed out from under the closet door. Move, I pushed Emma. We ran into the ensuite bathroom and I locked that door too. It was a flimsy hollow core door, a joke compared to what they were using. I jumped onto the marble vanity, my boots slipping on the slick surface. I looked up. The ceiling was smooth, painted white. There was no visible hatch, no handle. It's not here, Emma cried, clutching Zoe to her chest. It has to be, I said, running my hands over the drywall, pressing hard against the ceiling. It's seamless. It's a drop panel. I pressed the flat end of the crowbar against the ceiling, tapping along the drywall until the hollow times, thwack times suddenly changed to a dull, solid times thud. The edge of a joist. I tapped inward. The sound went hollow again, but different, lighter. I jammed the edge of the crowbar upward. The metal broke the paint. I wedged it in and pried down. A perfectly cut 2-foot square panel of drywall popped out and dropped, shattering against the edge of the porcelain sink. A wave of stifling, suffocating heat rolled down from the black square hole, carrying the smell of ozone, melting plastic, and hot dust. Above me, in the dark, I could see the faint, blinking blue and green lights of the server racks. Boost Zoe up, I ordered, reaching my arms down. Emma lifted her. Zoe didn't make a sound. She was terrifyingly compliant, her little hands grabbing my wrists as I hauled her up through the hole and set her down on the rough plywood flooring of the attic. Your turn, I said, leaning down for Emma. From the bedroom, there was a massive crash. The hollow core door of the bathroom shuddered in its frame. They were through the closet wall. They were in the bedroom. Emma scrambled onto the vanity, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't get a grip on the edges of the hole. I grabbed her by the forearms and pulled with everything I had. The muscles in my back screamed. She kicked her legs, finding a foothold on the towel rack, and I dragged her up into the sweltering heat just as the bathroom door handle rattled fiercely. I pulled my legs up, rolling onto the plywood beside Emma. I looked back down through the hole. The bathroom door shattered inward. A man stepped through the splintered wood. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing tactical pants, a black t-shirt, and heavy work boots. He held the long wooden handle of the sledgehammer in one hand. He looked up. Our eyes met through the 2-foot square opening. He didn't yell. He didn't run. He just stared at me with dead, professional eyes, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a radio. They're in the upper void, he said into it, moving to intercept. I slid the heavy wooden panel back over the hole, plunging us into the dim, artificial twilight of the attic. It wouldn't hold them. It was just gravity keeping it in place. I stood up, the heat instantly soaking through my shirt. The attic was enormous, running the entire length of the townhouse, but it wasn't an empty storage space. It looked like the server room of a mid-sized corporation. There were 4 massive, floor-to-ceiling metal racks humming with power. Hundreds of Ethernet cables snaked across the plywood floor like thick black veins, converging on a heavy industrial junction box mounted to the brick chimney. The noise was a constant, deafening drone of cooling fans fighting a losing battle against the trapped summer heat. Oh my God, Emma whispered, coughing as the dry dust coated her throat. What is all this? This is how they steal everything, I said, shining my flashlight over the blinking towers. They're skimming data from the whole grid. This is what Vance was talking about. We're standing inside the machine. I moved past the servers, sweeping the flashlight beam across the heavy, sloped timber rafters. We needed a way out, a gable vent, a skylight, anything. At the far end of the attic, near the front of the house, I saw it, a heavy iron louver designed for ventilation. It was large enough for a person to fit through. Beyond the angled iron slats, I could see the fading blue light of the late afternoon sky. There, I pointed. We get through that. We're on the roof. We can cross over to the neighbor's roof and get down the fire escape on the alley. We moved as fast as we could without tripping over the thick bundles of cables. The heat was dizzying. Zoe was lagging behind, her small legs struggling over the uneven plywood. When we reached the iron vent, my heart sank. It wasn't just screwed in. It had been retrofitted. A heavy steel padlock hung from a thick chain that wrapped around the iron slats and anchored directly into the structural beam. I grabbed the lock and yanked it. Solid steel. Stand back, I told Emma. I swung the crowbar, bringing it down as hard as I could on the body of the padlock. Sparks flew in the dim light. The metal rang out with a deafening clang times over the hum of the servers. The lock didn't even dent. I swung again and again. The vibrations shot up my arms, numbing my hands. It was useless. Mark, Emma said, her voice dropping an octave. She tugged at the back of my shirt. Mark, look. I stopped swinging and turned around, chest heaving. At the other end of the attic, near the hole we'd climbed through, the heavy plywood flooring was moving. It wasn't a hatch. The actual floor was shifting. A 4x8 sheet of plywood slowly lifted, pushed up from underneath. The drone of the servers masked the sound of the hinges, but I could see the dark rectangle of the main attic stairs opening up. A figure stepped up into the gloom, then another. 2 men. Not the guy with the sledgehammer. These men were dressed in the same charcoal suits as Arthur Vance. They moved with terrifying precision, stepping over the cables, their eyes locked on us. They didn't have sledgehammers. They didn't have guns drawn. They had zip ties hanging from their belts. They were the cleanup crew. Mr. Thorne, one of them said. His voice was calm, almost bored. There is no exit. The roof is locked. The perimeter is sealed. Please, put the crowbar down and hand over the binder. This is the last time we ask nicely. I didn't lower the crowbar. Instead, I took a step backward, pushing Emma and Zoe behind me until my shoulder blades hit the hot metal casing of the largest server rack. The cooling fans were roaring so loudly I could feel the vibration deep in my chest. I'm not putting it down, I yelled over the noise. The 2 men stepped fully onto the plywood. They moved with a terrifying synchronization, spreading out to flank me. They didn't look angry. They looked mildly inconvenienced. The one on the left, taller, with a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow, unclipped a heavy plastic zip tie from his belt. It was thick, black industrial plastic, not meant for wrists, meant for securing cables or maybe ankles. "Mark," Emma whimpered behind me. I could feel her hands gripping the back of my shirt, twisting the fabric into a knot. "Look around you, Mr. Thorne," the scarred man said. He took a slow, measured step forward. "You're in a box. You have a piece of metal. We have the house. The longer this takes, the worse the surrender terms become." "There are no surrender terms," I said. The sweat was pouring down my face, stinging my eyes. I blinked hard, refusing to break eye contact. "You aren't property managers. You're exterminators. We give you the binder. We don't walk out of here." "You've watched too many movies," the second man said. He was shorter, stockier, with the thick neck of a former collegiate wrestler. "We are a corporate entity. We don't want bodies. Bodies attract federal attention. We just want the proprietary data you stole. Hand over the binder. We escort you to your vehicle. You drive to Ohio, and this node goes back to sleep." "Liar," Zoe said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the hum of the servers like a razor. Both men stopped and looked at the 8-year-old girl standing behind my right leg. "The Rat King said the cleaners don't leave messes," Zoe said, staring right at the scarred man. "He said when the cleaners come, the people go into the dirt." The scarred man's jaw tightened, just a fraction of an inch, but I saw it. The corporate veneer cracked. Zoe wasn't guessing. She was repeating something Ethan had actually told her during his late-night shifts in the walls. "Don't take another step," I warned, gripping the crowbar with both hands like a baseball bat. I didn't aim it at the men. I turned my body and aimed it directly at the thick, trunk-like bundle of black fiber optic cables feeding into the top of the server rack I was leaning against. "I know what this is. I know what Vance is doing. You guys are scraping every bank account, every social security number, every keystroke in Knox Hill. You've got antennas in the rafters tapping the whole grid." The stocky man stopped. He looked at the cables, then back at me. "You're a high-level node," I kept talking, my voice gaining traction as I saw the hesitation in their eyes. "If I smash this rack, if I rip these cables out, what happens to your operation? Does Arthur Vance just write it off? Or do you two take the fall for losing $1 million in hardware and half the neighborhood's data stream? You swing that, and I will break both of your arms before the first spark hits the floor," the scarred man said, his voice dropping into a lethal, quiet register. "Try me," I said. I raised the heavy steel bar an inch higher. The radio on the scarred man's belt crackled. "Report." It was Vance's voice, distorted by static but unmistakable. The scarred man kept his eyes on me as he unclipped the radio and held it to his mouth. "Subject is backed against rack 1. He has the binder. He's threatening the primary feed." A long pause. Only the hum of the fans filled the silence. "Do not compromise the feed." Vance's voice crackled back. "The Knox Hill sweep is at 92%. If that rack goes down, we lose the entire upload. Secure the asset. Delay the subject." "Understood," the scarred man said. He clipped the radio back to his belt. He looked at his partner. They both took a half step back. I let out a shaky breath. It was a standoff. I had a hostage, and the hostage was a machine. "Okay," I said, my mind racing. "Okay, now we walk. Emma, keep Zoe behind you. We're moving to the stairs." "No," the stocky man said softly. Vance said delay, not release. He reached into his suit jacket. He didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a small, heavy black cylinder. It looked like a thick flashlight, but the end of it was capped with 2 metal prongs. A stun gun, a high-voltage cattle prod designed for human beings. "You aren't making it to the stairs, Mark," he said, pressing a button on the side. A thick, angry arc of blue electricity snapped across the prongs with a loud Times crack. The sound made Emma scream. "Daddy!" Zoe tugged on my jeans. "Not now, Zoe," I snapped, my eyes locked on the blue sparks. "Daddy," the Rat King slide. I risked a split-second glance down at her. She was pointing toward the brick chimney behind the server racks. It was dark back there, a narrow gap between the hot metal and the rough masonry. "What slide?" I whispered. "He said when the big boss comes, he goes down the slide," Zoe whispered back, "behind the humming boxes." I looked at the chimney. There was a secondary duct attached to the side of the brickwork, dropping straight down through the floorboards. It wasn't the main HVAC chase we'd seen on the map. It was a laundry chute. In an 1890s Victorian, the laundry chute usually ran from the top floor straight down to the basement utility room. Ethan must have modified it, pulling the opening up into the attic to create a fast, silent emergency exit that bypassed the main floors entirely. "Emma," I muttered out of the corner of my mouth. "Behind the servers. The chimney." "Mark, I can't," she sobbed, completely paralyzed by the sight of the electric arc snapping in the dim light. "You have to," I said. "On my mark, grab Zoe and get behind the rack." The scarred man saw us whispering. He didn't wait. He lunged, closing the distance in 2 massive strides, his hands reaching not for me, but for the crowbar. I didn't swing at him. I spun and swung the crowbar as hard as humanly possible directly into the face of the server rack. The heavy steel smashed through the plastic housing and violently impacted the internal motherboards. There was a deafening crunch times of breaking fiberglass, followed instantly by a brilliant, blinding shower of blue and white sparks. The impact shorted the main power supply. The noise was like a gunshot in an enclosed space. "Go!" I screamed, shoving Emma backward into the narrow gap between the server and the chimney. The rack screamed, literally screamed. A high-pitched, electronic warning siren began wailing as thick, acrid black smoke poured out of the smashed casing. The primary lights in the attic flickered and died, plunging us into a strobe-lit nightmare of sparking circuitry and emergency backup LEDs. The scarred man cursed, throwing his hands up to shield his face from the shower of burning sparks. The stocky man with the stun gun lunged forward blindly through the smoke. I swung the crowbar blindly in a wide arc. The heavy iron connected with something soft, a shoulder or a rib cage. The stocky man grunted in pain and stumbled sideways, crashing into the second server rack, sending a cascade of loose Ethernet cables raining down on top of him. I didn't wait to see if he got back up. I threw myself into the narrow gap behind the smoking server, squeezing my chest tight against the hot metal to slip past. Emma was already at the chimney. She was on her knees, coughing in the thickening smoke. Zoe was beside her, pointing down. A heavy metal lid had been pushed aside. Beneath it was a sheer, dark drop. The old laundry chute. It was lined with smooth, galvanized steel. It wasn't a ladder. It was literally a slide, plunging straight down through the center of the house, bypassing the second floor, bypassing the kitchen, all the way to the basement. It's too dark, Emma panicked, looking down the hole. It's a sheer drop, Mark. We'll break our legs. Ethan used it, I said, grabbing her by the shoulders. He used it to move fast. There has to be a dampener at the bottom. A pile of clothes, a mattress, something. You have to go. They're coming. Through the billowing black smoke, I could hear the scarred man shouting into his radio, his voice frantic. Node is down. He smashed the primary feed, requesting immediate backup in the upper void. Emma, go! I yelled, pulling her toward the hole. She looked at me, her eyes wide with sheer terror, then grabbed Zoe. Hold on to me, she cried. She sat on the edge of the chute, wrapped her arms tightly around our daughter, squeezed her eyes shut, and pushed off. They vanished into the dark with a loud metallic scraping sound that echoed all the way down the shaft. I waited for a scream, a thud, anything. 3 seconds later, I heard a muffled, soft impact from far below. Emma? I yelled down the chute. We're okay, her voice echoed back, thin and terrified. It's a pile of foam pads. Mark, hurry! I turned back to the gap. The smoke was thick enough now that I had to crouch to breathe. The emergency siren on the server rack was ear-splitting. A hand shot through the smoke and grabbed the collar of my shirt. It was the scarred man. His eyes were watering from the chemical smoke, but his grip was like a vice. He jerked me forward, slamming my face into the brickwork of the chimney. My nose crunched, and warm blood instantly flooded my mouth. You stupid son of a bitch, he snarled, twisting my shirt so tight it cut off my air supply. You just burned $20 million of corporate data. I choked, dropping the crowbar to grab his wrist with both hands. I tried to pry his fingers off, but he was too strong. He shoved me back against the chimney again, pinning me there. Where is it? He demanded, his free hand patting down the sides of my backpack. Where is the binder? He found the rectangular bulge of the heavy book through the canvas. He smiled, a grim, humorless expression, and reached for the zipper. I couldn't breathe. Black spots were dancing in the corners of my vision. I let go of his wrist with my right hand, dropping it to my side. My fingers brushed the heavy canvas of my jeans pocket. I felt the cold, hard square of the burner phone I had taken from the wall downstairs. I didn't try to pull it out. I just drove my knee straight up into his groin. It wasn't a clean hit, but it was enough to make him gasp and loosen his grip. I twisted violently to the left, tearing the fabric of my shirt, and broke free. I didn't stop to fight. I dove headfirst toward the open laundry chute. I hit the galvanized steel on my stomach, sliding downward in total darkness. The metal was slick, and the friction immediately started burning through the denim of my jeans. I picked up speed terrifyingly fast, the air rushing past my ears. I saw a flash of light as I passed the vent on the second floor, then another flash as I blew past the kitchen. I flew out of the end of the chute and crashed into a massive pile of thick, dense, memory foam mattresses that had been stacked in the corner of the basement utility room. I rolled off the foam, gasping for air, clutching my bleeding nose. Mark! Emma grabbed my arm, hauling me to my feet. Zoe was standing behind her, holding her pink backpack. The basement was pitch black, save for the beam of my flashlight which had fallen on the floor. I grabbed it, sweeping the beam across the room. We were back where we started. The heavy concrete planters were still blocking the egress hatch. The stairs led up to the kitchen, where the guy with the sledgehammer was probably waiting. We're still trapped, Emma cried softly. We just went in a circle. No, I said, spitting a mouthful of blood onto the concrete floor. They're reacting now. The node is down. Vance's priority just shifted from containing us to saving his operation. I swung the flashlight beam to the back wall. The fake ventilation grate that Zoe had drawn, the one the caretaker had left the food behind, was still hanging open. We don't go out, I said. We go under. Emma stared at the dark square hole in the wall. Into the tunnels? Are you insane? That's where they live. That's their territory. It's a highway, I said, pulling the black binder out of my backpack. I flipped it open, shining the flashlight on the master schematic. It connects 50 houses. If we stay here, they trap us. If we go into the tunnels, we can follow the map to a house that hasn't been harvested yet. We come up through someone else's floor and run out their front door. I didn't wait for her to argue. The sound of heavy boots was already thundering down the wooden stairs from the kitchen. The man with the sledgehammer had realized we weren't in the attic anymore. Zoe, go, I said, pointing to the grate. Zoe didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees and crawled into the dark space. Emma let out a sob of pure despair and followed her. I ducked in last, pulling the heavy metal grate shut behind me until the magnetic latches clicked into place. The space behind the wall was narrow, smelling intensely of dry earth, old wood, and the lingering scent of the cold chicken parmesan still sitting on the plate near the entrance. I had to crawl on my hands and knees, the flashlight clamped between my teeth, the crowbar tight in my right hand. We moved forward, crawling over the heavy floor joists. After 10 feet, the crawl space dropped off. I shined the light down. It wasn't a drop into dirt. It was a set of crude wooden stairs leading down into a fully excavated tunnel. The walls were shored up with heavy timber and lined with thick PVC pipes carrying power and data cables. It looked like a mine shaft built by professional engineers. We climbed down the stairs. The air down here was cold and damp, completely silent compared to the chaos above. The tunnel stretched out in both directions, lit intermittently by cheap, battery-powered construction lights strung along the ceiling. Emma stood up, brushing dirt off her knees. She looked down the long, dim corridor, trembling. Which way? I opened the binder. I traced the line from 412 Maple Street. The tunnel branched in 3 directions. Left went to the house across the street. Right went to the house behind us. Straight went to the corner lot. Straight, I said. The corner house, 420 Maple. The map says it's listed as holding. That means they own the paper, but nobody's living there. It's empty. We come up through their basement, break a window, and we're gone. We started walking fast, keeping our heads down to avoid the low clearance beams. The dirt under our feet was packed hard, worn smooth by years of foot traffic. We had gone maybe 50 yards when the tunnel suddenly widened into a larger circular excavation. It looked like a hub where multiple smaller tunnels intersected. There were a few folding chairs set up against the dirt wall, a small folding table covered in blueprints, and a massive metal lockbox sitting on the ground. It was a subterranean break room, and sitting in one of the folding chairs, calmly peeling an apple with a small pocket knife, was a woman. She looked up when our flashlight beam hit her. She was in her late 40s, dressed in a sharp, pragmatic gray pantsuit, sensible flats, and a lanyard around her neck that held a corporate ID badge. She didn't look surprised to see us. She didn't drop the knife or jump up. She just finished peeling the strip of red skin from the apple, set the knife down on the table, and sighed. "Mr. Thorne," she said. Her voice was smooth, professional, and terrifyingly polite. It was the woman from the burner phone. "I told you not to run." I didn't lower the crowbar. I just stared at her. She wasn't holding a weapon. She wasn't flanked by muscle and suits. She was just sitting there in the dirt, the humming of the cheap construction lights casting long shadows across her face. And then I heard it. Faint at first, muffled by the layers of earth and concrete above us, but growing steadily louder. Sirens. Not just one. A chorus of them, wailing down the main avenue and turning onto our subdivision. The smoke from the server rack. I had set off a massive electrical fire in an attic packed with industrial cooling fans and dry 1890s timber. The whole roof must have been venting black smoke into the neighborhood. The woman paused, the knife resting against the half-peeled apple. For the first time, her perfectly composed, corporate mask slipped. Her jaw tightened. She looked at the heavy industrial paper shredder sitting on the dirt floor next to her table. It was jammed, a thick stack of manila folders wedged halfway down the feed slot. She wasn't waiting for us. She was destroying the physical paper trail, and the machine had choked. "You're evacuating," I said. "The infrastructure is compromised," she replied. Her voice clipped. She reached into her suit jacket and pulled out a long, white envelope. She tossed it onto the folding table. It landed next to the blueprints. "That is a cashier's check, drawn from a legitimate, domestic bank. It covers your down payment, the funds taken from your joint account this morning, and an additional $50,000 for your trouble. Take it. Leave the binder on the table. You walk down that tunnel, go up through the vacant house at 420 Maple, and you drive away." I looked at the envelope. I looked at Emma. She was shaking, clutching Zoe to her chest, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She nodded at me, a frantic, desperate nod. "Take it. Let's just go." I stepped forward. The woman watched me, her hand resting near the pocket knife. I reached out and picked up the envelope. I opened it. It was real. A certified bank draft for over $300,000. My life savings, plus hush money. I folded the envelope and shoved it into the front pocket of my jeans. Then I tightened my grip on the binder in my left hand. "No," I said. She stood up, her chair scraping against the hard-packed dirt. "Mark, do not be stupid. The men upstairs. The men upstairs are trapped in a burning house," I interrupted, my voice steadying. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, absolute clarity. "Or they're running out the back doors to avoid the fire trucks. You're down here alone. You don't have security. You just have a jammed shredder." I didn't wait for her to argue. I raised the crowbar, stepped to the side, and swung it down as hard as I could directly onto her laptop sitting on the folding table. The screen shattered, the chassis cracking in half with a sharp crunch. She gasped, stepping back against the dirt wall. "Come on!" I grabbed Emma's hand. We didn't run. We walked. We walked right past her, heading straight down the tunnel toward the corner house. She didn't try to stop us. She just stood there in the dim light, staring at the ruined computer, the illusion of her corporate authority completely shattered. The tunnel sloped upward after 50 yards, ending at a set of rough wooden stairs leading into a dark basement. We climbed up. The air was stale and smelled like fresh paint. It was a flipped house, empty and waiting for a buyer. I didn't bother looking for a hidden latch. I just swung the crowbar at the heavy deadbolt on the basement door until the wood splintered and gave way. We pushed through the kitchen, ran down a short hallway, and burst out the front door into the late afternoon air. The street was absolute chaos. 3 massive fire engines were parked diagonally across Maple Street, blocking the entire intersection. Firefighters were unrolling thick yellow hoses across the lawns. 2 police cruisers were parked on the curb, their light bars painting the neighborhood in chaotic flashes of red and blue. Thick, acrid black smoke was billowing from the roof vents of our house. I looked down the street. The black sedan was still there, but the doors were open. Arthur Vance was standing on the sidewalk, a cell phone pressed tight to his ear, his face pale as he watched the firefighters take an axe to our front door. The pins in the windows didn't matter anymore. They were breaking the glass, tearing the frames out to ventilate the smoke. He saw me. From 3 houses down, across the manicured lawns and the flashing police lights, Arthur Vance locked eyes with me. He saw the black binder in my hand. He didn't yell. He didn't come after us. He just lowered the phone, got into the passenger side of the sedan, and the driver slammed it into gear. The car sped off toward the opposite end of the subdivision, turning the corner and vanishing from sight. "Hey!" A police officer was running toward us, his hand resting on his radio. "You folks can't be here. You need to step back behind the engines." I looked at Emma. She dropped her duffel bag onto the grass and collapsed to her knees, burying her face in Zoe's shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. The terror was finally draining out of her, leaving nothing but exhaustion. I walked forward to meet the officer. I didn't stop until I was standing right in front of him. I dropped the crowbar onto the asphalt. It hit the ground with a heavy, metallic clang. "That's my house," I said, pointing to the smoke. "Sir, the fire department is handling it. We need you to—" "I don't care about the fire," I said. I held up the black binder. "I need you to call the FBI field office. Right now. Tell them to look behind the water heater in the basement. Tell them there's a tunnel network connecting 50 houses in this subdivision." The officer stared at me, then at the heavy ledger in my hand, his expression shifting from annoyance to profound confusion. "They've been stealing identities for 20 years, I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "I have the maps. I have the ledger. Just make the call." It took 3 days for the dust to settle. The local police were completely out of their depth. The moment the fire department discovered the tunnel entrance behind the water heater, the federal government took over. The FBI brought in ground-penetrating radar, excavators, and dozens of agents. They tore the neighborhood apart. They found the servers. They found the subterranean hub. They found the locked boxes full of stolen passports, birth certificates, and cloned hard drives. Arthur Vance didn't get far. The FBI caught him at a private airstrip outside of Boston Boston trying to board a charter flight to the Cayman Islands. The woman from the tunnel, whose real name turned out to be Sarah Linwood, was arrested at a corporate office park downtown. Apex Holdings LLC was a massive, sophisticated domestic surveillance and fraud ring hiding behind the facade of a distressed property management firm. Because we had the master ledger, and because I had personally handed it to a federal agent in broad daylight, the legal mess untangled faster than anyone expected. The Department of Justice seized all of Apex's offshore accounts. The wire transfer that drained our bank account was reversed by Friday morning. The forged deed was nullified by a federal judge, and the bank, desperate to avoid a massive public relations nightmare, quietly finalized our original mortgage paperwork. We kept the cashier's check too. The FBI considered it part of the evidence trail, but after a long meeting with a federal prosecutor, they quietly agreed not to pursue asset forfeiture on the envelope. It was restitution. 2 weeks later, the neighborhood was quiet again. The FBI command post had packed up. The massive holes in the lawns had been filled in by city contractors. The smell of smoke in our attic was gone, replaced by the scent of fresh pine framing and new drywall. It was a Tuesday evening. We were sitting at the kitchen island. Emma was pouring a glass of wine. Her shoulders finally relaxed. The house was locked, but with normal deadbolts this time. We had hired a private contractor to pour solid concrete down the laundry chute and seal the basement walls with reinforced steel plates. There were no more hollow spaces. Zoe was sitting at the counter, her box of crayons spread out next to a piece of construction paper. I walked over and put a hand on her shoulder. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" I braced myself. For 2 weeks, I had half expected her to start drawing tunnels again, or men in suits, or the Rat King. Kids process trauma in weird ways, and I was fully prepared to start making calls to a child psychologist the moment I saw another subterranean map. Zoe looked up at me. She smiled. She slid the paper across the granite counter. It was a drawing of a house, just a normal house. There were 2 big windows, a front door, a yellow sun in the top corner, and 3 stick figures standing on a green lawn. No hidden rooms, no basement vents, no red X over the router. "It's just our house, Daddy," she said, picking up a blue crayon to color in the sky. "The castle is gone." I looked at the drawing, then over at Emma. She caught my eye and raised her wine glass, a small, genuine smile on her face. I sat down on the stool next to Zoe, watching her color. The hum of the refrigerator kicked on in the background, a completely normal, mechanical sound. I took a deep breath, letting the quiet reality of our home finally sink into my bones. We were safe, we were staying, and there was absolutely nothing left in the walls.